We're getting a dire warning about ISIS from FBI Director James Comey. He says the group has become a bigger threat to the United States than al-Qaeda.
ISIL is not your parents' al-Qaeda. It's a very different model. And by virtue of that model, it's currently the threat that we're worrying about in the homeland most of all. ISIL is buzzing on your hip, right? That message is being pushed all day long. And if you want to talk to a terrorist, they're right there on Twitter direct messaging for you to communicate with.
Joining us now to talk more about this is Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann. Lieutenant Colonel, I know you spent several years in the U.S. Army and the special operations here. Talk a little bit about why Director Comey characterizes ISIS as such a big threat to the United States.
Hey, Contessa, thanks for having me on. You know, the biggest reason is one simple word: story. ISIS are better storytellers than al-Qaeda and certainly better than the United States. They've found a way to use their narrative to tie it to history and to mobilize, disgruntled youth and move them toward a greater cause. And they use story to do it, and they're brilliant at telling their story both in person and on social media. And when you do that, you touch people emotionally and you move them, and they tell a better story. I talk about that in my book, Game Changers, a whole chapter on it, and it's a growing problem that we had better address is the narrative.
Well, how do you address that then?
Well, it starts with first understanding what their narrative is. They want to not only promote an Islamic caliphate around the world, but, they want to usher in the apocalypse. They're seeing a set-piece battle in Syria with the Crusaders, that's us, and, people have bought into that. And if we don't understand their narrative, first and foremost, we're not even in the same ballpark. Second of all, we have to have a narrative ourselves that competes with it. We have to tell a better story than what they do to our own people and to those who are at risk. And right now, I don't even see us entertaining that as a course of action. We're just worried about, how we can strike them or how we can shut social media down, and that's just not going to work.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of people say, well, hey, if you've got all these thousands of Twitter followers of ISIS, why not just shut down their Twitter feeds for ISIS? Will that work, or is they just find another avenue of communication, another social media outlet?
Yeah, you know what, Contessa, that's a great question. But if you think about it, hearken back to the Arab Spring and look at the different ways that folks in the those governments tried to shut down social media, and what happened? It went even broader. It went exponentially higher. I think the more we try to just shut down the narrative, the more it actually grows. Our best bet is to understand their narrative, to step back from it, and then tell our own story in a way that competes with it. And you know what else? We also need to hold ISIS up as thugs and criminals and show the kind of behavior that they really partake in, and that it's not acceptable to locals and it's not acceptable to the world. Right now, we're really not doing that. We really need to take on their narrative and show them for who they really are.
Yeah, I have a hard time understanding why anybody would be drawn to a group that massacres entire villages. Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.